I believe that I believe I have found a single document that is essentially controlling the entire US military, and it's all because they're selling off the government-run grocery stores. Okay, that's a little dramatic, but despite not being anywhere in the news, this document from February of 2023 has basically been a crystal ball into what is happening in 2025 and why. Unelected government officials determining defense spending policy, the like and subscribe button, and let's talk about it. The reason I believe that this document that I am holding right now is controlling the entire military is because of this headline. They're privatizing the commissary, aka selling it to the lowest bidder. For those of you who don't know, you'll usually find two big stores on any active military base. The PX/BX/ whatever the Navy calls it, which is like your Target that sells a little bit of everything. The second is the commissary, which is the grocery store. Both of these are government run, but apparently that is about to change soon. The reason that this headline tipped me off is because I realized I had read this before while researching for a different video that talked about all the new programs the Pentagon was canceling. In that video, I made a joke that they wanted to get rid of the commissary, and now it's actually happening. I like to think that I had nothing to do with this, so don't get mad at me. That's not how I use my powers of manifestation. But I read that line in this document. Resourcing the strategy of denial, optimizing the defense budget, and 3 alternative futures. And hopefully, in at least one of those futures, I eventually find joy and fulfillment in my life. The paper lays out a military restructuring plan to essentially fight China only. Russia is mentioned here and there, but this is saying that China is what's known as a pacing threat, aka the outside actor that determines where our primary focus of arming and training our military should be. The Soviet Union was the pacing threat during the Cold War, the Axis during World War II, and Uzbekistan never, even though it should be. The more I started digging, the more I realized that pretty much everything in these pages is starting to happen or has already happened. So let's dive into what this says and what we can expect to happen in the future. First of all, what the fuck is a strategy of denial? Good question. Strategy of denial is like deterrence, but taken a step further. Deterrence is placing a company of American soldiers as a tripwire force in a random country bordering Russia with the idea that if they attack said country, they will spark a war. The force there is small enough so that the US isn't hemorrhaging billions of dollars a year, but large enough that if you schwack all of them, someone is gonna smash the Article 5 button. A denial strategy basically says not only will you spark a massive war, but you won't even achieve the preliminary objective, so no territory seized, no high-level military targets destroyed, and a lot of burnt-out tank hulls and exploded aircraft in the meantime. In layman's terms, that would mean the Chinese Marines wouldn't even make it to the beachhead, and Russian helicopters would be shot down before they even had a chance to land on their objective. It's the she's not interested of geopolitics. You aren't even getting a chance to get rejected by the only hot friend in the group. It's not a bad idea, and theoretically would end a war before it even started, or better yet, deter someone from launching an attack in the first place. At an international level, this means being the dominant military force of every region, literally everywhere on Earth. And I'm not exaggerating, it says it on page 8. That is important to consider because this document isn't about defending just the beaches of Taiwan or holding the Fulda Gap. It's about literally being the reigning hegemon in every major area on Earth. At least the parts with money, at least. That's also on page 8. So sorry, Central Asia and most of Africa, you're on your own for now. Hey, stopping wars before they even happen, that's all good stuff. What the fuck does this have to do with selling the on-base grocery store to a corporate conglomerate? Well, to answer that question, let's look at the document itself. Oh, it's right there on the cover. A strategy of denial is considerably more expensive than deterrence. It's the difference between having a sign in front of your house that says you have an alarm system and having AI-controlled high-caliber auto turrets actively scanning your front yard. The whole purpose of this document is to ask 3 questions. What does the military need? What does the military not need? And how much is it going to cost? For this, we're going to go a little out of order and start with what this document says we don't need. When the military gets rid of a piece of gear, a weapon, or aircraft or whatever, it's called divestment. But when I do it, all I get are questions like, who are you? What are you doing here? How did you get an F-16 onto an apartment complex parking deck? And for reference, these kinds of questions are both hurtful and unproductive. The document covers this in a dedicated section labeled divestments. See, I wasn't just making that up. On page 17, it lays out that anything that is not, quote, surface-to-surface strike, aka a missile that launches from the ground, flies through the air a bit, and hits the ground, or, quote, surface-to-air, meaning stuff that kill flying things, is on the chopping block. And that's like most things, by the way. It then calls out 3 programs, the AMP-V program, which got canceled, the OMFV program, which got canceled and then replaced with something else, the Paladin Integrated Management Program, which got canceled, and Strikers, which weren't canceled because we already have a bajillion of them, but a planned purchase of new ones was canceled in August of 2025. So far, we are 4 for 4 on this. The document then called for reducing the number of Army aircraft, which happened very dramatically recently, and to get rid of the A-10, which is currently happening. To be fair, that last part has been touch and go for like 2 decades now, but they finally put the nail in the coffin for the old Burt machine. Right after talking vehicles, it called to reduce the number of troops rotating in and out of Europe, which has happened, and a huge reduction and eventual elimination of funding for the European Deterrence Initiative, which is basically the overall budget for the increased American presence in NATO since Russia took Crimea in 2014. And bada bing. It then spends a couple paragraphs talking about cutting the number of DoD civilians, which has happened and then unhappened and then happened again and then unhappened again, and then calls for Space Force personnel reduction. But like, come on man, they're still trying to figure out what their uniform should look like. Give them a little breathing room. But that has kind of happened by them opening up jobs to non-officers, which if you read between the lines on that, reads cheaper labor. And finally, in the last paragraph, it says we can save money by eliminating the commissary program. The paper calls these bill payers, the things that we would get rid of or sell while freeing up budgets for other things they deem more important. The biggest one it lists directly is basically the entire army. Now, it's not saying to cut the army, obviously, but the majority of these cost-saving measures will come by cutting stuff from the army. It gives 2 big reasons for this. One, the army has a good bit of organizational inertia from doing the heavy lifting in Iraq and Afghanistan, meaning a good bit of tech we use today was designed to fight the Flip-Flop Brigade, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool for the job when Type 99Bs start coming over the hill. The second reason is that even the stuff built to fight that big conventional World War III scenario is focused on fighting the Russians and Europe, and that's not wrong. Our tanks are really heavy, the current fleet of helicopters minus the new one all have relatively short ranges, and we dress up our fake bad guy vehicles like Soviet BMPs. The author argues that Russia isn't really a threat because its military is getting grinded down in Ukraine, and anything left would easily be handled by the European members of NATO for the most part. This document doesn't say explicitly, but a lot of the, quote, divesting we would do would theoretically be going to Ukraine, so getting rid of equipment designed to fight Russia in order to fight the Russians. Now this is an interesting set of lines because the publisher of this paper is the Marathon Initiative, a group co-founded by a man named Elbridge Colby, and he's the current Undersecretary of Defense, meaning he is the guy whispering in old Pete's ear behind the scenes and setting policies. And the interesting thing is during his Senate confirmation meetings, he deflected many times when asked if Russia invaded Ukraine, which, hey, you know, we're all entitled to our own opinion, but he did eventually say they did, so I guess he had a change of mind at some point. Now, I avoid politics for the most part on this channel, and the paper I'm referencing is very bipartisan. It calls out the good and bad decisions of every administration going back to Bush #2. However, I do think it was important to mention that the author and his institute are not apolitical for context purposes. At these higher policy levels that aren't in the public light, it can also be hard to determine if narrative drives policy or policy drives narrative. I'll let you make your own decision on that one, but either way, Lockheed's stock is going green, so that's the real takeaway here. I should also mention that one thing I found very strange as I was reading this, and it left the biggest question mark above my head, when the title refers to 3 alternative futures, it means giving options for the military if the budget increases, which is future 1, stays about the same, which is future 2, or is drastically cut, which is future 3. Everything that has come true so far has all been from the budget goes down option, despite the fact that we are in the budget goes up in real life. The document was written in 2023 and claimed that the most likely future was budget going down in the next few years via bipartisan agreement that spending had gotten out of hand. As if bipartisan agreement would ever happen in real life. But because it assumes the budget will go down, the vast majority of the actual words in this thing are spent explaining why we need to cut certain programs and why certain projects should be canceled or units shut down. The paper even words it almost tongue-in-cheek that the scenario where the budget goes up is a would-be-nice but probably not gonna happen scenario, calling it a, quote, radically increased level of defense appropriations. And despite that, we're looking at a $1 trillion budget next year, the highest it's ever been. In the scenario of budget goes up, the paper literally advises that no major cuts to anything happen, and that section of the chart is literally blank. And it states, quote, no major divestments were made in this defense budget option. So despite that numbers are going up, divestments are very much happening across the force. So at least on the side of divestment, what hasn't happened yet? Well, even with a decreased budget, it called for an additional SFAB brigade, the Brown Beret guys who train foreign militaries, and instead 2 brigades got shut down. It also called to cut the M1E3 program to make the new Abrams. However, that is still going strong, at least of me making this video. A lot of planes are on the potential chopping block. The document calls for the retirement of some F-15s, F-16s, and U-2 spy planes. Some is never a comforting number to throw around in this kind of scenario because it fills the span between one and all. F-15Cs have been retired largely, though the EX is still around and being bought. F-16s have begun their retirement in favor of the F-35, and the U-2 spy plane will officially be retired next year. Now, it should be noted that when you talk about planes and say something is being retired, that doesn't mean that one day you have a stock of them and the next day you don't. Retiring planes takes many years, if not decades, and half the time the Air Force will get halfway through retiring something and then be told by Congress that it needs to stop retiring said thing. For reference, the B-52 has been retired 5 times now, and we still got them. Certain things are still in the works, like increasing the industrial base for shipbuilding, stockpiling long-range munitions, and closing the on-post grade schools for the military kids. So if you're an awkward military brat that lives on base, go get bullied somewhere else. But I couldn't shake the idea that there was just something else here. Why are we cutting everything with our $1 trillion budget? It's not going to the new stuff like drones and new boats, the things people say we need to research and development, because that money's already accounted for. The answer is that it's largely going into ammo. Lots and lots and lots of ammo. If there's one takeaway from this paper, it's that they want the United States to buy a lot of things that get loaded into some kind of weapon and when fired, make stuff more deader than when we found it. One of the biggest phrases you'll hear these days is magazine depth. Magazine depth is a marketing term for how much ammo do you have. Why there is a need to say we need to prioritize magazine depth instead of saying we need more ammo, I don't know. I was not a communications degree in college. But more specifically, the paper wants rounds that are long range and make a big splash once they do hit. One reason why a strategy of denial is looking like it's going to be the future of American doctrine is because it removes a lot of the political wishy-washy from preventing wars. A defining factor of wars in the 21st century so far, at least ones that have included seizing territory of other countries and claiming it as your own, is that everyone has pretty much gotten away with it at this point. One reason for that is that the land grabs so far have all been relatively modest, if you don't count Ukraine. No one wants to start World War III over South Ossetia, loosely defined borders between India and China, or the Nagorno-Karabakh region. To borrow the metaphor I used earlier, if someone breaks into my house and sets the alarm off, they'll probably get away with it if all they do is run in and steal my beloved waifu pillow and then run away, because no police force is going to dedicate time and resources to get it back. However, if I had autocannons installed and they blast a robber and convert him into pieces of a robber, the body pillow remains safe. The international community doesn't want to have to conduct a counterattack to restore international borders. They'd rather just not let someone take territory in the first place. Therefore, the US wants more gear to prevent an invasion, like missiles, rather than stuff to react to an invasion and counterattack, like tanks. The only downside is that if that happens, I'll have less stuff to make content on. Anyway, those kinds of munitions are very expensive, and it's even more expensive when you remember that they have to be forward deployed, loaded, and ready to go at a moment's notice, not sitting in a climate-controlled warehouse in the United States. The AI-controlled minefield and containerized autonomous drones that would prevent a town from being captured are a lot more expensive than the rounds in a soldier's magazine that would be used to take that town back. But that doesn't really make a good option for a good armor reforger scenario though. But on that note, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please subscribe and I will see you in the next one.